Okay, so now that the dirt layer is pretty good, we're just going to move on, and we're going to start with the bump map, because for the most part the color information and specular information is actually okay. We'll probably have to revisit it a little bit later once we start checking all of our details and if we want to add any distinguishing marks and things. But for now, we're just going to move on so that we have kind of a little bit more of a full package going on here. So, first thing I want to do is want to show everything. Just hit U. That'll unhide everything. Now, I haven't gotten to this cloth box yet, and I am actually going to do that last because it's a completely separate element. So, I want to actually re-hide this piece. Okay, just select it and hit H here by faces. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the bump layer. Okay, so get some bump maps that we're going to take into Photoshop and turn into a normal map. So what I want to do is I can pretty much just bring that down, say new layer, call this bump base for now, and bump map, not normal map, bump map. Okay, you can see that it's trying to figure out tangents and all that, and actually I don't think you can see that. I think I have that cut off just because I'm trying to save some space here. But anyways, we have this bump map. Now bump maps pretty much for the most part you want to paint between black and white. And so with this layer selected, if I come here with a paintbrush and I paint, you can see I'm adding bump map detail there. Okay, that's not exactly what I want though. For this, I don't want to use a stamp. Let me pop that off. I don't want to use actually full strength. And my spacing I want to be pretty tight, about 4, 5, or 6 ought to do it. And for this I'm going to keep these at 0, 0. Now what I want to do is actually come in here and just create a couple of dents. Okay, just going to scrub. Dents tend to happen at the corners. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, is just scribble out a couple of dents here. Kind of run them along the edge, just to simulate some actual damage. Okay, this is much more of a dramatic thing than those scratch layers. Okay, one of the things I also want to do is I want to take some of the existing information here and bring that into my bump map. So these gouges layer is a good candidate for that. So if I take this guy and duplicate that one, come up and I'll rename it gouges underscore bump. Okay, just hit enter. I'm going to drag that down here. What that's going to do is, because it's white, it's actually going to bump it out. And what I want to do is have that be cut in. So I'm going to take this, right click on it, and I'm going to tell it to adjust color. Now I think that went off the screen a little bit. Okay, adjust color here. And all I got to do is take the value negative, and that turns it to popping in. Now the thing about it is it's very strong right now, the whole entire bump layer. There's a couple of options to fix that. You can actually go to your default material here and tell your bump amount, bump depth. Just if I half that, you can see all my bumps. Everything I paint goes half, which I don't like to do. I like to keep this full, and I like to actually adjust my layers here. If I hit my paintbrush again, it'll bring me back over to here. And I like to just tone back the individual layers. I don't want a super huge bump there. Okay, about 3 should look pretty good. And you can see that that looks like a nice little dent. And inside that, there's specular information that's highlighting it. So it's going to stand out a little extra. Okay? And that works out pretty good. And I've got a bunch of bumps everywhere. The other thing I could try is my scratches layer, which is actually quite a lot of stuff going on. It's these little gray guys in here. If I duplicate this guy, duplicate right there, I can just name it underscore bump. Okay, now I can drag that down on top. You're going to see I'm going to get all this craziness going on. Okay. If I change this to 100%, it's going to be absolutely awful. Now keep in mind that these are painted in white, which means that they are sticking up off of the surface. So I want them to be in black so that they are dipping into the surface. Okay, so let's right click, say adjust color, and I turn the value to black, hit OK. Okay, you can see that's entirely too deep, so I'm probably going to need about 1. You can see it's subtle, but it's there. All that pitting and scratching is actually slightly breaking up that surface, and if I make it 3, you can see it's more apparent, but to me that's actually a little bit too much. So 1 or 2 just kind of breaks that surface up a little bit, and actually I prefer 1 because I want it to be so subtle that it's a very minor thing. Remember, these are kind of just like scratches across the surface. They're almost just dulling effects, and if I zoom in real close, which I can't get too close, take this piece here, you can see that there's a highlight. If I hide this, it takes a second, you can see that goes away, and if I bring it back, all that very minor highlighting shows up. Now the thing I want to point out is that bringing this down to 1 is actually 1% out of 100. So when I go to make a normal map off of this in Photoshop, it's actually not going to show up at all. There's going to be none of this information. So when I get to Photoshop, I'm going to need to adjust these layers again. I probably need to bring this up to 10, and this gouges probably to 30. Okay, Mudbox tends to preview things a little bit differently. Plus, there's an inherent major difference between a normal map and a bump map. Okay, the bump maps tend to need to be a little bit more exaggerated. All right, so I'm going to take this layer down to about 50% for now, and just keep hitting. I'm also going to turn down my strength here so that I can be a little more subtle in parts. Okay, I'm just going to go through and kind of hit it in a couple of spots. The harder I press, the deeper my damage is. Okay, and you can see that I've already got some damaging from those previous layers that I got to recycle, which is a good thing. And I can add a couple other little nicks and gashes and pock holes and things like that where this guy's been pretty severely hit by a piece of, you know, concrete chip or some kind of debris or shrapnel flying around through all of the years of its service. Okay, again, this is a weapon that is has been in heavy use, and that's part of the point of what I'm doing. So the other thing is sometimes it can actually be kind of hard to see because of the lighting. It can help if I don't want to do that. If you right click on the model, it gives you a different set of options than if you right click off the model. But I'm going to go with flat lighting, which actually, no, I'm not. That's the wrong one. Because if you notice, flat lighting doesn't have any lighting information, and bump maps play directly off of lighting information. So if I'm in flat lighting, there's literally no bump map information whatsoever. What I want to do is uncheck smooth shading, and that will help me visualize things a little bit better. It gives me a little bit of a wider berth in the angle that I can actually get away with. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come and I'm going to gouge out a couple of these areas where the bullets are always feeding in. This should be a pretty heavily contested spot, so this is constantly under. And some of these other gouges that were already there from my gouges layer, I can deepen them a little bit just to further enhance those guys. Any one of these scratches that's already here, like this guy here, I can take and kind of further enhance that just a little bit. So some of them are deeper than others. Okay, variation is one of the major things that we're actually after here. Okay, some of these spots where there's actually that extra specular highlighting, I can break it up using the bump map here to further give a reason for why it's more highlighted. Okay, and you notice it's noisy in there. It's rough. It's very bumpy in itself as well. If I go kind of large here and make a large area, you can see that it's a singular edge that's going on here, and then once it's inside, it's flat. Okay, but if I kind of scribble it out, then it's noisy inside there because I haven't filled it all the way in. Okay, if I did something like that, okay, and I could use that, but I don't really want that kind of detail on there. I may add something like that in a couple of other spots. The other thing too is I want to kind of try to draw out interesting types of patterns here. A little bit of a starbursts and things. I'm going to hit these corners and stuff. Again, sometimes it can be kind of difficult. You can move your lights around. I tend not to worry about doing that all that much because I kind of know where it's going to show up. But if you don't, you may want to hit L and click and then kind of move your lights around a little bit to help you out. Now, I don't want to hit that inside there. I just want this edge like that. Okay, just rough that up. It's very, very easy to go way overboard on this. And in some cases it's warranted. In others, really depending on the look that you're after here, you want to keep it a little more subtle. Just minor spots here and there. Okay. Again, I can go really light. Just barely get a mark on there. Okay, I can make a really much larger brush. Make more of a softer, larger dent. Okay. Like right here in the dirt, kind of dent that in a little bit. A little bit extra there. You see that picks up nice highlighting going around there as I spin that camera right in there. See that? It's a subtle dent, but it's nicely there. Do that over here too a little bit. Okay, that's what you're after. Chips at corners, big dents and minor scratches at other parts can really super enhance the look of the gun once you get this, because now you actually have some surface variation as opposed to just color variation, and really anchors this, especially in whatever lighting situation that you're actually going to use, because all of those lights will play off of these. Once it's turned into a normal map, all this stuff will get picked up at various angles. And again, it's another thing that only gets picked up at certain angles, and considering that this stuff's in motion, kind of it goes by the eye. Doesn't really sit there and stare at you. The other thing we're going to use the bump map for is actual details, things that are part of the gun that we didn't model, such as little rivet holes, bumps, or bolts, I meant. Okay, stuff like that. Grip bumps. Again, the barrel has been beaten pretty badly, so get a little bit more in there. Don't be afraid to go deep, don't be afraid to go very shallow. Anything goes. Okay, but again, you don't want something like this. That doesn't make any sense. What would ever make that? But something like that would be perfectly fine. Nobody would question it. Okay. Now, considering that this comes to a point, this part right here might actually be a little difficult to paint on. If I were to hit this edge, can end up breaching over here, and I got to make sure that I continue that. If I want to make sure that this piece looked like it got hit right here. Okay. Again, kind of being a little scribbly with it so that it's noisy inside of its own little shape. Shape is kind of, I don't know, alien shape or whatever, but inside of it there's chaos in there. You want to kind of maintain that. And again, doing somewhat of a diamond shape on these corners. Okay, when I say diamond shape, I mean this shape. Like that. Okay. I'm not going to keep this, but that's the shape I want. And this being the corner, I can extend that out like that. Okay, that's what I mean when I say that. And I get that one back. So if I wanted to do a diamond shape here, I kind of build it up, and then I kind of trail it thinner out. Like that. And that tends to look pretty good. And you'll see me doing that a lot here. On a lot of these corners, I'll build it up, and then I'll kind of slightly trail it down the actual edge, and then kind of scrape it out a little bit like that. Okay, diamond. The half of a diamond on each side of the edge there. Now if I want to make sure that I can see this a lot better, I can go back to something that I mentioned earlier. I can take my gloss layer and actually make it really a lot lower. And I like to do this by numeric input and do about 0.01. What that does is that widens out my my lighting. It gives me much more of a broader angle on my where my highlights are actually gonna lay, so I can view it from more angles and still see some of that lighting information happening. Okay. Just come here and do a couple of, get a big brush and do a couple of large dents here and there. I can shrink it a little bit and get a little bit deeper in there, so it's kind of slight bit of indentation. Okay. The other thing I can do is kind of do like semicircles, concentric, and then get smaller and smaller and smaller, so it's almost a swirl, but it's not swirling like that. Okay. It's swirling like complete circles, but they're not complete. Okay. And that can be like an impact, slight ripple, and just scrub across it there a little bit. And even though, you know, I was just doodling right there, I can leave it. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay. So I'm doing big bumps, little dents, scratches, corner hits. Okay. I gotta make sure I add something funny somewhere. I don't mean like, you know, hilarious, like it's the greatest joke in the world, but just something goofy that if anybody was paying attention, it's like, oh look, there's a shoe. Here. Just to prove that, I'll draw. Remember, this is the view, so it's just going to be not that scene. So here, I'll draw a shoe. It's a little shoe. It just looks like any other dent. And just keep going around and filling in areas that just feel too plain. And just break up this surface like that. Okay? Definitely goes a long way. In fact, it's a pretty important phase to do bumps. And you know, again, you don't have to hand paint them if you don't want to. You could bring in a layer, some texture or whatever that's got a nice set of interesting looking bumps. But I personally just like to do it exactly where I want. And pretty much what I do is I just keep going until I feel like I've exhausted everything and I can't think of anything else to really add, or any other areas that need it, because deliberately skipping around the model and hitting completely different parts. If you notice, like, I'm looking at the back over here, and then I'll zoom out and I'll just kind of shoot all the way over to the front and say, okay, I'm going to hit over here now. Completely ignoring everything in the middle. I'm not working down the gun. Okay, I'm trying to keep my mind fresh, so I basically shoot around it and hit all kinds of different areas, and I zoom out. It's like, okay, I'll get something right around here. And then I'll zoom out and take a global look, and it's like, let's make sure there's something over here. Okay. Again, very light, doing a relatively large brush, keeping pretty light pressure, because I don't want to overdo it like that. Okay, even though that doesn't look bad, I don't want that. I don't want any one of these to catch a particular attention. Okay, I want them all to just kind of get lost, but definitely be there. And there's a very unmathematical approach to this. Okay, I'm not using too many straight lines, and if they are straight, they're very short. Okay, that's a straight line, but it's short. I'm not doing something like this, where I keep a really, really long straight line, because that looks like something that was manufactured into the weapon. Real world chaos would not necessarily provide that, although there's nothing saying that it couldn't have been dropped from the top of a building and landed right on the corner of something and hit a perfectly long straight dent, but that might be a rare occasion, and even if it could have happened, it would still just not sit well with the viewer. I've gone outside and I've seen clouds, and I have told people, it's like, man, look at those clouds, that's weird. Like, if I drew that, painted that in Photoshop exactly the way it was, people would say, those are like the fakest clouds I've ever seen in my life. Yet there they are in the sky, shaped exactly like a lion attacking an eagle. I've seen that. Tried to get a photo of it, me and my niece. It was flawless, 100% flawless 3D volume of a eagle flying at a lion. I was like, nobody would believe that. But there it is. But I wouldn't use that in art, because nobody would believe it. You know? I mean, you can see, I can make a dragon out of almost every cloud I ever seen, whether or not it's curled up or flying or whatever, but it's the same kind of thing here. Even though something may happen, if it looks too deliberate, then it can, subtly and psychologically in the back of somebody's head just not sit right. You know, they'll tend to shy away from it some ways. It's not the same thing as the uncanny valley, which, if anybody knows what the uncanny valley is, it's that point in 3D in art that where something becomes too real, but not real enough. A good example of that is the movie The Polar Express. The characters, they look really real, but because they're not real, and they're missing that extra level of realism, they go from being appealing to horrifying, where it actually disgusts the user, like creeps you out, gives you just a bad feeling about it, and you don't like it. You don't like the way it looks. You want to look away. You don't want to be watching that movie anymore, because it's like, oh god, they're like realistic mannequins, and there's something wrong with it, but I can't tell what. If I look at any one particular detail, yeah, it looks pretty real, but there's something about the movement, there's something about the surface, there's something missing. And that's the uncanny valley, if you didn't know what that, if any of you ever hear anybody say that, it's hitting the uncanny valley, like the latest what was that movie? Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey. It's really close. However, they made sure to keep it on a cartoony enough level where it actually is kind of appealing. If you look at the proportions of the characters, they're caricatures. Okay, but the details on them are very detailed and real. You know, the lighting looks pretty real. But that's an example of staying just outside of the uncanny valley, where the Polar Express is an example of jumping right into it and really just freaking everybody out. There's another one that I watched recently that I felt hit the uncanny valley was uh, Mars Needs Moms. The little Seth Green character. He was, so to me, it was just this. It was creepy. You know, it was just freaky. I didn't like it. You know, I watched. I mean, I thought the movie was okay, and there was like this fat guy in there, and they did him pretty good. But again, he looked really realistic. It was just his proportions were enough off where he looked cartoonish enough. But the little Seth Green kid was just this creepy little monster to me. It was gross in a way, you know. And even though this is not a character or whatnot, the same general theory applies. I'm keeping enough unrealism in here, and the other thing is that all of my weapons have this same type of look that is cohesive enough, and the fact that it's not 100% perfectly real helps, and the fact that it's going to be ran with a cell shader, okay, to make it like that comic book look, helps. You know, I'm not going for photorealism here. I'm going for artsy kind of, you know, artsy fartsy. So keep in mind what your goal is when you're doing this stuff. If you're going photoreal, you really need to inspect, you know, the real deal. You gotta go and look at it, and you gotta really study what's going on with the surfaces, and a lot of it is in the lighting. You know, sometimes you look at some of the movie stuff, and it looks really good, looks really real. But then when you see an example of the actual what they did, the work, you know, you look at the color texture, the diffuse texture. It's like, what? That doesn't look good at all. It's so simple. It looks stupid. You know, and there's not even really a specular map to note, but it looks good in the final product because of the lighting. And another one is excuse me, Skyrim. Open up some of the textures and look at the diffuse texture. It's like, how does this look good? Doesn't make any sense. It's fuzzy. It's ugly. You know, it's noisy. You know, it's just it doesn't make any sense. But then they throw it in that particular lighting, and you realize, oh, this is very tuned specifically like this to match the lighting of the game engine. And in the final product, it looks good. You know, but each separate element just looks ridiculous. And if you looked at this bump map on the just by itself on the, you know, as a diffuse texture, which I could show you, but I'm sure you can imagine it. It would be the same thing. It was like, that doesn't look like it would be doing anything to help. When you see it on the bump and you see it with all of these other layers active, that's you know, one of the nice things about Mudbox is that you can paint directly on the bump layer and actually preview it as a bump layer. If I were doing this in Photoshop, I'd be painting just black spots, and they might not look that good. So here I can tune the bump for however I want it, you know, and that's a powerful thing to be able to do this. And I think I'm about exhausted everything I really want to do here with the major hits. Okay, these are the major dents. And if I want to, I can duplicate this layer, bring it into the specular channel, and tell it to either dull these out or make them pick up highlights, depending on whatever I want to do. I mean, either one actually kind of works okay. taking a hit can actually dull a surface. It can also reveal the fresh metal underneath, which is actually going to be more shiny. It's just a matter of whatever look you're going for. There's really not an awful lot I want to do more to it. This is going to take a lot of hits. So I'm going to run down this. Keeping in mind that this is on the right side of the gun, which is going to be rarely seen. I'm just going to carve it out a little bit of a channel there, even though it's messy. Just going to noise it up and scrape it up, just to simulate that it scratches as this thing gets pulled by. Sometimes this thing is just shooting back and forth every time a bullet is fired. So it possibly hitting this front guard would really dent the crap out of this. So banging that up. Plus he might be constantly slinging this into stuff, bumping it on corners of walls and concrete and other pieces of metal. Drops it on these ends here and things. This being a piece that's sticking out pretty drastically would arguably take a lot of hits. Okay, I'm just going to do 1 or 3 or 30 more of these and call it done. Can never really decide. I'm just going with the flow. I'm just going with whatever feels right. Just doing whatever I feel like, to be honest with you. And that's how you should approach this kind of stuff. Just do whatever you feel like. You can always erase it. If somebody complains about it, it's easy to fix. Just erase it. The chances that somebody complaining about this are pretty low. I don't think anybody's gonna question it. So you're staying within a little bit of a safety bounds. But if I, if I drew like a little scene with a boat, somebody most definitely probably gonna, hey, what's with the boat on the side, and you'd be like, I don't know, I just did it for stupidity reasons, and okay, I'll get rid of it. So, like I said, you stay within bounds of what you feel comfortable doing. If you feel like drawing a boat on here, go for it. You probably would only get one person that noticed it. Okay, just kind of get a couple of last minute ones in here. Break up these long flat surfaces that really don't have a lot of damage yet, and just wave them out a little bit. Almost not there. Just enough. So that there's some bits of variation going on. Okay. This looks okay. One more. Alright. I don't like that one because it's in an area where the paint's not laying down nicely, so I'll just do this one a little more deliberately. Make sure I swirl it around so all these edges don't hurt me. And you can see, some of these are actually standing out like turds in a punch bowl, like this here. So I can make it a little more subtle by going over it with a little bit of a bigger brush. And if I want to, I can actually blur it. Okay, that really tones it back. Careful with the blur tool on in Mudbox, it's okay, but you can actually kind of completely wipe something out really, really quickly. So I keep a very light pressure when I use the blur. Okay, that's looking good. All right, so that's metal, and really that's what it requires, The base color, you use specular. Okay, I highlighted the edges, gave a base, very oxidized, cloudy type of specular going across the whole thing. Added some dirt, some scratches, and some bump, and this pretty worn out metal there. Alright, I'm going to hit some of this plastic here. Now plastic tends to be like a thorough material. It's a kind of material that is just through and through the same material. There's no like real outer or inner core. It may be hollow. This particular piece is going to actually be plastic and maybe rubber. Really, it's in the specular and the bump map where the majority of the magic for plastics happen. Unless, obviously it's painted with some kind of a decal or whatever, flag on here or some stripes or something. If this was, like a toy car or whatever, you'd have to paint those details, like a model or something. But for the most part, this isn't going to have any information on it whatsoever. So a flat solid color is okay. Don't need to add any variation. It's got its dirt on there because it's not immune to getting dirty. It will not rust. Okay, it was not going to oxidize. The only thing it's going to do is get dirty, and it's going to have bumps and tears and stuff. So the trick really is just to get the bump surface detail. Metal tends to actually have a flat surface. Aside from any damage that happens to steel, it's perfectly flat and smooth. You take a spoon, and run your thumb in the middle of a spoon. That's, you'd have to look at that under a micron, microscope to really see any difference, pitting or putting in the surface detail. It's hyper smooth, it's like a glassy surface. Plastic tends to be less so. Not that there isn't perfectly smooth plastic, but for the most part, they tend not to be. At least on something like a stock of a gun like this. Okay, same thing on this guy. However, this handle here would feasibly be perfectly smooth. Wouldn't have any actual textured detail on it. So what I do is I have a little bit of a trick for this to make it plastic, and it works okay for rubber too, and I'll show you that when I come back. And it's actually going to require us to go into Photoshop and create ourselves a stencil. But it's so simple and so basic that anybody can do it. So I will be back in a minute.